welcome back to the video. In this video, I'm going to be tier listing all of the Spider-Man villains. From the first Spider-Man movie to the Venom movies to the newly released Across the Spider-Verse, I'll be ranking all of the villains from the worst to the best. As you guys can see on screen, I have the tiers bad, meh, good, great, and best of the best. And before I get into my specific ranking, let me know your ranking in the comments down below. As always, before we get into the tier list, make sure to subscribe and notification on so you don't miss any time I upload a video or go live. Both of us get more time. Let's get right into it. These villains aren't in any specific order, but first we have Prowler from Into the Spider-Verse, and honestly, I'm gonna say he is a great villain. The Uncle Aaron twist was absolutely insane for me personally, just because I didn't know anything about Prowler going into the movie. I didn't know that Uncle Aaron was even anything near a villain. I didn't know anything about the Miles Morales story, and so Prowler was just such an amazing surprise in Into the Spider-Verse. I'm not gonna be talking spoilers for Across the Spider-Verse, but if you know, you know. Next up, we have Green Goblin, and I do want to clarify, all of the villains that have variants of themselves, like the Spider-Man No Way Home villains, they are separated into two different villains because I do view them as two different characters in terms of just the story, writing, and how they're utilized. We have the Green Goblin from the first Spider-Man Sam Raimi movie, and I'm going best of the best, one of my favorite villains of all time, and it's honestly just because he is so maniacal. I'll talk about the No Way Home version of this character later, but I think what Goblin succeeds in so much in the Raimi movies is just the fact that he is a menace. And that's it. Like, there's nothing more to the character. He's pure evil. I love Norman Osborn's origin as well, with him getting kicked out of his own company. It is just so well done.
You know how much I sacrificed?
Not to mention Willem Dafoe's acting, easily, in my opinion, the best actor in any Spider-Man villain role. Just putting on an absolute masterclass. He plays that innocent version of Norman Osborn as well, being tormented by the Goblin. It's just super well done overall. And then we have Doc Ock from Spider-Man 2, and he's also going in best of the best. Also, if you guys didn't know, I do rank them inside of the tiers themselves, so I would put Doc Ock below Green Goblin in best of the best. And you guys will see that's how I get my official ranking by the end of this video. But back to Doc Ock. Spider-Man 2 is one of, if not my favorite movie of all time. Greatest comic movie of all time in my opinion. And a big reason of that is because of Doc Ock. Even though, and I've heard this being said a lot online recently, and I completely agree, Doc Ock is definitely sidelined in the movie. At least he doesn't have as much of an impact in Spider-Man 2 as Goblin has in Spider-Man 1 on just a villainous impact. But I think the reason why it works is because Peter is just having a complete existential crisis. And so Doc Ock serves this purpose of being Peter's mentor and then being shifted into a villainous character, becoming greedy and then wanting all of this power. His utilization is perfect, and that's why I think he goes in best of the best. I also think the action is so great. The bank scene where they climb on top of the bank and he's holding Aunt May, just that final battle with the building being torn apart. There are some amazing sequences with this Doc Ock. I just love the character. Also, Alfred Molina, like Willem Dafoe, just puts on an amazing performance. Then we have, I think it's called an Elemental. There's a few on this list from Far From Home. I'm gonna go meh, just because I find them entertaining, and conceptually I think the Elemental is cool. This fire one specifically, because if I'm not mistaken, this is the one where the Night Monkey, aka the like noir type of suit, that's the Spider-Man suit that he fights the fire guy in. That one's really, really cool. Then we have the Doc Ock from No Way Home, and I'm gonna go good for this one just because I feel like in general, the No Way Home villains, other than one of them, they just didn't really have much to do, and they're definitely more just kind of on the side there for Tobey and Andrew to be introduced, and then they have someone to fight as well. That's not to say it's a bad inclusion, because I really enjoy Doc Ock. I love Alfred Molina, and just the action as well in this movie is great. The bridge fight scene is really, really fun. You have some great elements here, but just in general, especially when you compare it to what Raimi did with Doc Ock in the best of the best, even though Raimi had a lot less to balance in that movie, where obviously No Way Home had like 6 villains, 3 Spider-Men. There was a lot going on, so you can't give Doc Ock all the time in the world. That's why this version of Doc Ock is just as good for me. Then we have Electro, but this isn't the Amazing Spider-Man 2 Electro. This is the No Way Home Electro, and I'm gonna go top of good, a little bit above Doc Ock. Not in great though, in my opinion, just because I think this version is way more charismatic, but the story really isn't as compelling as the Amazing Spider-Man one. Then we have Rhino from the Amazing Spider-Man 2 as well. I'm gonna go top of meh. You have a great action sequence with Rhino, but other than that, doesn't really do much. Mostly set up for the Amazing Spider-Man 3, which we didn't end up getting. Then we have the first Venom villain movie, Carnage, and I'm not gonna lie, I do think Carnage is meh, but I'm gonna go top of meh, borderline good, just because I think Woody Harrelson does an amazing job as Carnage. Again, it doesn't feel like they do something super compelling with the alternate version of the symbiote in the Venom movies, and Carnage kind of suffers from that as well. The character is 100% carried by Woody Harrelson's human performance, and I feel like it's kind of unfair to even judge that in relation to Carnage himself, but I'm gonna count that. Then we have Goblin, but from the Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I'm also gonna go meh with this one, but I'm gonna go above Carnage just because I think the impact of this character and also the way that they built him up with being a friend of Peter's, that they didn't talk for a really long time and they're finally starting to catch up, and then all this Goblin stuff happens. I feel like that is just an amazing way to go about telling that story, and honestly, it's a little bit different than what we got in the Raimi movies, which I can really respect. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know the name of the villain in the Venom movie. Okay, it's Riot. The fact that I didn't know his name is not a good sign. I'm gonna go, honestly, bad for this. I don't think there's much to say here. I didn't even know the villain's name. Just forgettable, absolutely not at the forefront in any way, shape, or form, and it kind of makes sense. I mean, Venom's a movie about the symbiote and then Eddie Brock. Like, the villain's not really at the forefront, and they kind of shoehorn him in there. Then we have Goblin from Spider-Man No Way Home, and I'm gonna go great, but under Prowler, I think that this Goblin is so cool. It takes the really great and phenomenal elements of the Green Goblin from the Raimi movies, but gets tailored perfectly to No Way Home and the use of it in this Tom Holland version of Peter Parker. Whereas in the Raimi movies, he definitely wants to break Peter, but more on like he wants to team up and just have as much power as he can. Here, none of that matters. Goblin just wants to absolutely break Tom Holland's Peter Parker, and that's the priority that's at the forefront. I think at times, like I said with Doc Ock's variant in No Way Home, it just kind of gets undermined by the fact that there is so much going on that you can't fully focus on Goblin's narrative and just the way that his story is being told, because a lot of that second going into the third act is without any Green Goblin. After that apartment sequence, until the final battle, you get zero to no Goblin or just villains in general, so it's kind of hard to judge him in that regard. Then we have Electro from the Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I'm gonna go good, but above the Electro in No Way Home. First of all, I think the design, it's not that great, but it's unique and I respect it. But also, I really do love the way that this character is created. He thinks he's really important to Spider-Man in Spider-Man's life. He thinks that Spider-Man noticed him, but Spider-Man forgot who he is, and that kind of ignites a spark in him per se. It is so cool. Such a creative villain as well. Just overall, a very solid villain. Then we have Sandman from Spider-Man 3. I'm gonna go top of good, above Electro from the Amazing Spider-Man though, just because speaking of backstories like the Amazing Spider-Man 2's Electro, I think the backstory with his daughter and just trying to get back to her and save her, and in a movie that has way too many villains and way too much going on in Spider-Man 3, I think they do a good enough job taking time for Sandman. That whole collider sequence where you see the sand particles going into his fingers, everything is very creative, and I just love the way that the character also gets resolved. Next up, we have Lizard from No Way Home. I'm gonna go top of meh, just because I think there's enough use for the character that puts him above the rest of the villains in meh. I don't really have much else to say until we get to the Amazing Spider-Man Lizard. But moving on, we have Shocker from Homecoming. I'm gonna go meh as well, but I'll go top of meh just because I think there's that cool sequence with the school buses. All of these villains in this tier are mediocre, and Shocker being at the top is kind of shocking. Sorry. Just because he doesn't have that much screen time, but at least he's remotely interesting. Then we have Harry's Green Goblin, and even though I think this one's interesting, I'm still gonna go top of meh, and I'm gonna go top just because I love the Raimi movies a lot, and I just love the way that they build Harry's relationship over all of the movies, and I'm definitely biased just because I'm taking into account the Harry Osborn from before before he was the Goblin. And so I don't know if that counts or not, but I'm going to count it. My only gripe and why he's in meh and not good is because I don't like the fact that he like hit his head and lost all of his memory. I feel like that wipes a lot of the great story elements from the first two movies. Next up, we have the Water Elemental from Spider-Man Far From Home. And I'm going to put this in bad as well. And I'm going to move the Fire Elemental down to bad. And honestly, I might move Rhino down to bad as well. I like and I think these elementals are cool and interesting, but I just cannot put them on the same tier as these other characters, to be honest with you. Then we have Tombstone from Into the Spider-Verse, and I'm gonna go probably meh. I'll probably go bottom of meh, just because there's nothing that this character does that's outright egregious. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing that like pisses me off about the character, but he's still a fine character. He's just not utilized enough in the movie because there's not enough time for him. Like, he just can't be shoehorned in there. And I'm glad they don't BS the story and make it a stupid story, but he just doesn't have that much screen time, so I don't know how to properly really judge him. But then we have Kingpin, which goes in, I would honestly say, top of great, not best of best, but yeah, top of great. I love his motivation of using the collider to get his family back, and then also obviously we know the implications of that and Across the Spider-Verse, but he's just a brooding menace. Like, he is just insane. I also absolutely love his design in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and I just love the way that he'll do anything to see his family again. And yes, obviously that's a very evil thing. He does some very, very bad things to get to the point that he's at, but I love how he thinks he does no wrong. He thinks he's completely right. I mean, all of these villains do. But the fact that he's willing to break multiverses to get to his family makes him so compelling to me. Next up on the list is one of the newest Spider-Man villains, Spot from Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And as of now, I'm going to put him at the bottom of great. I think this might be a hot take, but I think why I'm putting him at the bottom of great right now, and I think he has potential to go best of best, I'm putting him in great right now is just because I think that he had too little screen time in Across the Spider-Verse for me to put him in best of the best. But he was also way too funny and had too great of a backstory, to be honest, and he was just very interesting and compelling. I was always eager to see more of him, and though we didn't see as much as him as I wanted in Across the Spider-Verse, I have no doubts that we'll see way more of him in Beyond the Spider-Verse, and honestly, I'm just super excited to see where the story goes from here, because Spy is such a compelling villain in that he has that idea of being shunned away from society like Electro in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but he's also one of the most powerful interdimensional or inner multiversal beings. He has so much power in just his body, and the fact that he's shunned away from society and like this is the only thing he can turn to do, and he just wants to basically destroy Miles' life. He has basically every part of these villains from that, everyone that's on the tier list above him, he's like the best parts of all of them. And I think as time goes on and he gets more and more fleshed out, I think he'll only move higher and higher on the list. Then we have Venom from Spider-Man 3, and I'm gonna go middle of goodish, right above Electro in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, just because I judge the Raimi movies way different than other people. I feel like I am so biased. These are the movies that I grew up on. I absolutely love them. Some of the first comic book movies I ever watched. I'm kind of judging this on the symbiotes effect as well, but I love the way that Eddie Brock's story is folded into Peter Parker's story, with not only the Gwen Stacy stuff, but also the photographer stuff. And it's just pure hatred. Like, he's literally preying on Peter Parker's downfall.
To ask you for one thing. I want you to kill Peter Parker.
I don't know how much there is to say about this character, and I feel like I'm just definitely overrating him because I like Spider-Man 3 and the Raimi movies a lot, but it is what it is. It's my tier list. Next up, though, we have Lizard from The Amazing Spider-Man. I'm gonna put him at, like, honestly, I think it's a hot take. I'm gonna go middle of great. I actually really, really like Lizard. I haven't seen The Amazing Spider-Man in a hot minute, though. I haven't seen it since before No Way Home came out, so it's been a little over a year since I last saw it. But the thing is, I'm torn on this just because I like Lizard and I like the idea of Lizard, and I like the whole thing about the scientist trying to regrow back his arm and all of those elements of it. But I think that final concept of what Lizard is trying to achieve of turning all of New York into lizards, that might be the stupidest thing I've ever heard of in my life. Again, it just has me torn because the personal side of the story works really well, but then you have that overarching thing about all of New York, that just doesn't work as well for me. Then we have Vulture, who I'm putting at the bottom of best of the best. I think Vulture is one of the greatest MCU villains, such a compelling character, and honestly, Michael Keaton brings it all to this character. And I think as a whole, the villain is basic, but like Goblin, it works in Spider-Man's story, and honestly, like Doc Ock as well, the villain isn't as intertwined with Spider-Man, and so they can kind of take breaks and focus on Spider-Man's personal life and all these other elements, and then still come back to Vulture, and they connect it really well with Liz. Like, a big chunk of Homecoming is just the fact that Peter wants to be with Liz, and he's really struggling with that, and then all of the Vulture stuff happens. It's just a crazy connection, and I feel like that's what really solidifies him as just an amazing villain. Obviously, there's that downside of him being connected to Tony Stark, but I think they make it work at least a lot better than they make it work with Mysterio, just because, yes, he's connected to Tony Stark, but it's just for a little bit. Like, the general idea of Vulture isn't 100% cemented in wanting to be Tony Stark or wanting to be like Tony Stark. But Mysterio, on the other hand, definitely falls more into just wanting to be another Tony Stark. Then we have Sandman from No Way Home, and I'm putting him at like the bottom of meh, just because there's nothing done wrong. But there's just nothing done in general. Like, it's a very, very just basic character. Again, No Way Home is just very packed to the brim in general, and they can't really do much with Sandman anyway. I will say, I do remember that one gag of him sitting on the chair in Happy's penthouse, and he keeps spilling sand everywhere. That made me chuckle.
A majority of voters oppose the Statue of Liberty renovation.
Oh, sorry.
Anyways, moving on, we have Mysterio. I'm putting Mysterio in great, probably above Lizard, below Spot. I'll put him above Spot, actually. I think it's my Jake Gyllenhaal bias. I absolutely love Jake Gyllenhaal, one of my favorite actors in general. And I think there's a lot of charisma because it's Jake Gyllenhaal, and that's why he's in great. I also think a lot of the visuals are amazing that stem off of Mysterio, and that's also why I like Mysterio so much. Then we have the Doc Ock from Into the Spider-Verse. I think her name is Liv. I'm gonna put her at top of good, to be honest, just because she's actually very, very funny, and her use in Into the Spider-Verse is honestly better than the use of most of the other characters in the good tier. Honestly, I would say Doc Ock has a better, the No Way Home version of Doc Ock has a better utilization of the story overall, but the version Liv Octavius in Into the Spider-Verse is also just really, really funny. A great variation of the character, there's a great impact on the story, and her action is also so great. But finally, we have a character that some might not actually consider a villain, but I would. Spider-Man 2099. I'm putting him at the bottom of great for now. And I'm not really basing this off of how villainous the characters are. This is just a character tier list of the villains in general. But I think as a character, Miguel O'Hara, his backstory, his reasoning for creating a spider society, I think all of it is so well executed in Across the Spider-Verse. He's the leader of this super high class Spider-Man society, and he is the one in charge, and no one questions him until it comes to Miles. Now, obviously, if you've seen Across the Spider-Verse, and I don't want to give any spoilers away, there is a hint at another overall villain at the end, which now gives us that mystery villain Spot as well as Spider-Man 2099. So going into the Beyond the Spider-Verse, I don't really know what their plan is for progressing Spider-Man 2099 as well as Spot and the mystery villain, but as of now, at least my prediction for Beyond the Spider-Verse, I think that if Miguel O'Hara's story is further explored and they do go into the details of if Miles can figure out all of this stuff that Miguel told him not to do, if they start to question Miguel O'Hara and then he goes on to his own tangent thing about becoming a big bad villain and stuff like that, a villainous Spider-Man, I think he could become a best of the best villain. And that's why I included him here, because I do think there's a lot of potential for him to move even further up the list. But guys, that wraps up my ranking for all of the Spider-Man villains. Again, comment your ranking of all of these villains in the comments down below. And again, if you want to fill out this tier list for yourself, you can click the link in the description down below. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.